My name is Isabella Carter. I'm 37 years old, and this year my family decided I didn't belong at Christmas. Not with a conversation, not with a phone call, just a text. We think it's best if you skip Christmas this year, Isabella. Kate's engaged now. She'll host. We just want something simpler. I remember staring at the message. Frozen, like someone had punched the air from my lungs. No punctuation, no warmth, just a cold dismissal wrapped in passive politeness. They didn't want me at the Christmas celebration, the very celebration I had created, funded, hosted for 15 straight years. 15 years of roasting turkeys, polishing silverware, hanging garlands with trembling hands at midnight, 15 years of transforming my Victorian home into a holiday sanctuary, all erased with one message. And the worst part? It wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. They chose her. They chose Kate, the sister who couldn't keep a job for more than a year, who never once lifted a finger to help set the table. But she had something I didn't, a diamond ring and a fiancé with traditional parents. Apparently, that's what Christmas was about now. They called me too intense. That's the label I got after years of love, detail, and devotion. Too organized, too emotional, too much. But here's the thing. They didn't uninvite me from Christmas. They freed me. And if you've ever been cast aside by people you've sacrificed everything for, if you've ever stood in a beautifully decorated room and felt utterly unwanted, then this story is yours too. Hit like if you've ever been the black sheep in a family that claimed to love you. Comment and subscribe, because I promise you, what happens next will stay with you. Because this year, I won't beg for a seat at their table. I'll build my own, and I'll fill it with magic. I didn't cry. Not that night. Instead, I stood in the middle of my dimly lit living room, the same room where, year after year, the tree had stood tall, glowing with the warmth of my effort. And I looked around at the quiet. And for once, I didn't feel guilty. I felt awake. If they didn't want the Christmas I poured my heart into, fine, I'd give it to someone who did. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Clara Jennings, the director of Rose Hill Children's Home, a place I'd donated to silently over the years but never truly stepped into. "Clara," I said, breath trembling but certain, "how many kids are staying with you over the holidays this year?" 32, she replied after a pause. "Why?" "Because I want to host Christmas for all of them, here, in my home." There was silence on the other end, then a sharp inhale. "Are you serious?" "More than I've ever been." And just like that, the loneliness I'd carried the night before began to lift, not because it disappeared, but because I gave it purpose. The second call was to my agent, Nadine, a woman who, unlike my family, never once told me I was too much. In fact, she thought my holiday content was gold. "The Food Network signed off on your proposal," she said, nearly shouting with excitement. "They want to do a feature, a Christmas special. You'll be hosting, and filming starts next week." I hung up, heart pounding. 32 children, a national broadcast, and a house that had always been a stage for beauty, now becoming a sanctuary for belonging. My phone lit up again, another message from my mother. "Isabella, you're not answering. What are you doing for Christmas? Are you going away somewhere?" I put my phone face down. Let them wonder. Because while they scrambled to plan a peaceful Christmas in an apartment filled with plastic garlands and polite small talk, I was already drafting the blueprint for something much greater, no more proving my worth to people who treated it like an inconvenience. This time, I would host the kind of Christmas that healed hearts, that lit up eyes, that reminded people what the season was truly about, and they had no idea what was coming. The messages started trickling in by the second day. "Isabella, are you mad? You're being so quiet." "You're not coming to Kate's? She already ordered a ham." "Mark's parents are very traditional. Please don't make this about you." I didn't respond. Instead, I poured a fresh cup of coffee, opened my old planning notebook, the one my sister once called obsessive, and began sketching out a new vision. Page after page filled with ideas, timelines, grocery lists, and room layouts. This time, it wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about giving joy to children who'd never had a home for the holidays. The doorbell rang mid-morning on day 3. I opened the door to find Mrs. Holbrook, my neighbor from 2 houses down, clutching a tin of cranberry shortbread and wearing a puzzled smile. "Isabella, dear," she began cautiously, "I heard from your mother at the market. Is it true you're not hosting Christmas this year?" I held her gaze for a moment, then smiled gently. "Christmas isn't canceled, Mrs. Holbrook. It's just evolving." She blinked. "Well, the whole neighborhood always looks forward to your lights and cider. It won't feel the same without you." I took the tin with a thank you and watched her walk away, her confusion echoing everything my family was probably feeling. Let them be confused, because for once, I wasn't bending myself to be understood. In the following days, the transformation began. The old Victorian home, with its creaky wood floors and stained glass windows, became a living, breathing storybook. One room would be a North Pole bakery, where the kids could decorate cookies with real pastry chefs. Another, a wish tree room, filled with handwritten dreams from each child, turned into ornaments sparkling with hope. The backyard, a winter wonderland, complete with fire pits, blankets, and hot cocoa stations. And still, the texts came. "Why won't you answer? You always host. What's going on? Isabella, this is childish." I said nothing, not because I was angry, not anymore, but because silence was finally my power. For years, I filled every empty space with effort, every doubt with another dish or centerpiece. Now, I let the silence speak for me, and it said, "Watch, just watch." Late one night, I sat at my dining table surrounded by blueprints, donation forms, camera schedules, and fabric swatches for the children's costumes. The soft hum of fairy lights filled the room. I looked around and felt something unexpected. Not the kind my mother wanted, quiet, controlled, minimal, but the kind that comes from knowing, deep in your bones, that you're doing something right, even if no one claps for it. Especially then. By the end of the week, my quiet neighborhood was no longer so quiet. The Food Network crew arrived just after sunrise on Monday, 3 production vans, 2 lighting trucks, and a small army of assistants who looked both curious and excited. As they unloaded cameras and equipment, I stood on the porch, wrapped in a wool coat, holding my notebook close like a shield. "You ready for this, Isabella?" asked Chloe, the segment producer. "More than ready," I replied. And I meant it. Inside, my home was coming alive. Each room was being transformed, not for perfection, but for meaning. The living room was anchored by a 12-foot pine tree we called the Wish Tree. Every ornament shimmered with a handwritten dream from one of the children at Rosehill. A bike, a warm coat, a real Christmas dinner, a forever family. I read them aloud to the camera as we filmed, my voice cracking more than once. "Each child's wish hangs here," I said softly, touching the branch. "We're not just decorating a tree, we're honoring hope." The camera operator wiped away a tear behind the lens. The dining room was now a storybook banquet hall, set for 32 children and 10 staff members. Handmade place cards, personalized stockings, and an antique sleigh I'd found at a flea market, now polished and ready for Santa's grand entrance. And still, the texts came. "Mom says you're doing some kind of media thing? Why didn't you tell us? Are you seriously ignoring your own family for strangers?" I didn't reply, because by now I had nothing left to explain. Word traveled fast in our town. The local news station caught wind of the project and ran a teaser that evening. Local chef transforms home into Christmas sanctuary for orphans, full story coming Christmas Eve. My phone lit up again, this time from numbers I didn't recognize. Strangers, supporters, neighbors, but not my family. The crew captured every angle of the process, the baking sessions, the hand-painted backdrops, the rehearsals for the kids' carol performance. In every shot, the house glowed, not just with lights but with purpose. This wasn't content, it was redemption. One evening, as I stood in the kitchen reviewing the filming schedule for Christmas Eve, Chloe looked up from her monitor. "You know," she said. "We've done hundreds of holiday specials, but this feels different." I smiled, stirring cinnamon into a batch of cookie dough. "It is. Because this wasn't about being seen. It was about showing the children of Rose Hill, and maybe even myself, that sometimes the magic we give to others comes back to save us." By the second week, the silence from my family gave way to something else entirely: interrogation, accusation, panic. It started with a call from my mother. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice, carefully controlled but laced with tension, rang out. "Isabella, I saw the news. Are you really doing this for TV? For orphans? Why didn't you tell us? Are you trying to make us look bad?" I didn't reply. The next message came from my father, gruff, irritated. "You've hurt your sister's feelings. She's trying to start her own tradition. Why can't you just let her have this one Christmas for once?" I wanted to scream. "Let her have it?" As if I was stealing something that had been handed to her, not something I'd built year after year with blood, sweat, and sugar-dusted fingertips. But still, no response, because some things deserve silence more than explanation. And then, on Thursday afternoon, Kate showed up. No text, no call, just the sound of heels on my front steps, a hurried knock, and then her voice. "Isabella, open up." I did. She stood there, wrapped in a sleek gray coat, clutching her designer bag like a shield. Behind her, one of the Food Network vans gleamed under the winter sun. Her eyes scanned the porch, the wreath made from paper snowflakes the Rose Hill kids had crafted, the hand-lettered welcome sign. Then she looked past me into the house, where lights sparkled and laughter spilled from the dining room. "What is all this?" she asked, stepping inside. "Christmas," I said simply. She stared, wide-eyed as she took it in, the wish tree glowing in the corner, the warm smell of cookies baking, the sound of volunteers singing carols with the kids during rehearsal. "Is that a TV crew? You turned Christmas into a show?" I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to the sideboard, picked up a folder, and handed it to her. "What's this?" "Profiles," I said quietly. "Each child's story, their Christmas wish, what they've survived." She flipped through the pages, her face softened, her lips parting as she read. "I didn't know," she whispered. "No," I said gently. "You didn't want to." A long pause stretched between us. "Mom's worried you're doing this to punish her," Kate murmured. "To punish all of us." I shook my head. "No, Kate. I'm doing this because these kids deserve a Christmas that feels like magic, the kind I used to give you, before it became too much, too intense." She looked down, shame flickering across her face. "You should go," I said softly. "You've got your simple dinner to plan. I have work to finish." As the door closed behind her, I didn't feel angry. I felt resolved. Let them misunderstand me, let them whisper, because I wasn't doing this for them anymore. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in a soft blanket of snow, the kind that made everything feel quiet, magical, and impossibly pure. My old Victorian home looked like it had been lifted from the pages of a fairy tale. Icicle lights dripped from the eaves, wreaths adorned every window, and glowing lanterns lined the walkway. By 4 p.m., the Food Network crew was in full swing, capturing every frame as the children from Rose Hill arrived in small groups, bundled in scarves and wide-eyed with wonder. "Welcome to Christmas magic," I whispered as I opened the door to each child, my heart swelling at the sight of their awestruck faces. Inside, the house had become a world entirely their own. The North Pole Bakery buzzed with cookie decorating, sticky fingers, and laughter. The storybook room was filled with plush pillows and fairy lights as volunteers read tales aloud. But the centerpiece was the wish tree, standing tall in the living room, glittering with ornaments, each one holding a child's handwritten Christmas wish. And then came Tommy, 8 years old, quiet, watchful. He didn't run to the cookie table like the others. He stood by the tree, his eyes fixed on one particular ornament, one he had made with a volunteer a week earlier. I walked over just as his trembling fingers reached up and gently pulled it down. He opened it. Inside was a small slip of paper, the same one he had written. I want a family who wants me, not just for now, forever. But this time, there was a second note, one he hadn't written. Approved for adoption. Meet your forever family tonight. Tommy froze. The paper fluttered slightly in his hands, then his eyes lifted to the couple standing behind me, warm, teary, waiting. Tommy, the woman whispered, voice shaking. We're here, if you're ready. He dropped the ornament and ran into her arms without a word. The man knelt beside them, wrapping his arms around both. It was the kind of embrace that didn't just hold a child, it anchored him. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. The crew filmed in stunned silence. My mother's hand, yes, my mother, reached over and squeezed mine tightly. Isabella, she whispered, eyes glassy. This is what you do. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to shrink to make space for someone else's version of peace. I didn't feel too much. I felt right-sized, whole. Because this wasn't just a party. It was a night that changed lives. And in a way I never expected, it had changed mine too. The celebration continued late into the night. Soft carols echoing through the house, mugs of hot cocoa warming tiny hands, and laughter that seemed to pour from the very walls. The camera crew quietly filmed from a distance now, more reverent than directive, like they too understood that this was sacred ground. I was in the kitchen refilling trays of gingerbread men when I heard the front door open. I turned, and there she was, Kate. Her eyes were red, makeup smudged, and in her hand was the same folder I had given her days ago, now creased at the corners, as if she had held it too tightly. Behind her stood my parents. My mother's expression was unreadable at first, but her hands were clenched around a handkerchief, the one she always pulled out when emotions became too large for words. My father looked small, humbled, his usual composure replaced by something raw, like he was seeing me, really seeing me, for the first time in years. Kate stepped forward. I watched the special, she said, voice barely audible. The whole thing. So did Mom and Dad. I nodded, unsure of what to say. I'm sorry, she continued, her voice cracking. All these years we called you intense, when really you were just magical, and we didn't want to see it. I held her gaze, my heart pounding but steady. Then my mother stepped closer, her eyes scanning the room filled with glowing lights and joyful children. The way they look at you, she whispered. It's the way you used to look when you were planning Christmas for us, before we started tearing it down with complaints. My father swallowed hard. Princess, we were wrong. We forgot what Christmas really meant. We forgot what you mean. There it was. The apology I had once begged for in silence year after year. Now it came without demand, without performance, just truth. I exhaled slowly and stepped aside. Come in, I said. There's still time to see what real Christmas looks like. They followed me into the living room, where the children were gathered around the wish tree, singing in unison, their voices pure and full of hope. Tommy sat with his new family, his head resting peacefully on his mother's shoulder. My family stood there, silently absorbing the joy, the kind of peace no silence or simplicity could ever bring. And in that moment, I didn't need to be validated. I didn't need to be forgiven, because I had already forgiven myself for trying so long to earn love that should have been freely given. Now, if they wanted to stay in my world, they were welcome. But the rules had changed. This time, I set the table, and I chose who got a seat. Christmas Day arrived under a clear winter sky, sunlight glinting off the fresh snow from the night before. My Victorian home, still glowing with lights and laughter from the night of magic, now held a new kind of warmth, one I hadn't expected, but quietly hoped for. That morning, my family came back. Not with demands, not with excuses, but with their sleeves rolled up and hands full of dishes, wrapped gifts, and something even rarer, humility. Kate was the first to walk through the door, balancing a tray of sweet rolls and wearing a soft smile. I figured your oven could use a break, she said. I raised an eyebrow. You baked. Well, Mark helped. Okay, fine. Mark baked, but I supervised. We both laughed, and for once it didn't feel forced. My parents followed behind her. My father placed a bottle of wine on the kitchen counter and looked around the home he once called excessive. You always knew how to make Christmas feel alive, he said. And my mother, quietly laying out the holiday china she once rolled her eyes at, paused for a moment to touch one of the ornaments on the wish tree. I used to think this was too much, she murmured. Now I realize it was always just enough. We sat down to dinner in a house that no longer needed approval to shine. No one criticized the centerpiece. No one complained about the cinnamon being too strong. No one asked me to tone it down. Instead, they passed dishes with care, asked about the children, shared what they'd learned from watching the special, and in their eyes, for the first time in years, I saw respect. Not for the performance, not for the production, but for me. I didn't say much that afternoon. I didn't need to. The lights, the music, the laughter of children still echoing in the halls. They said enough. Because this time, my family wasn't just attending Christmas. They were witnessing it. And maybe, for the first time, truly understanding what I had been trying to give them all along. Dinner had settled into a quiet rhythm, the kind that only happens when everyone is full, both in stomach and in spirit. Soft carols played in the background, candles flickered gently along the table, and the snow outside continued to fall in lazy flakes against the windows. Then, my mother cleared her throat. She stood slowly, holding her wine glass with both hands, not in performance, but in something that felt almost reverent. I'd like to say something, she began. The room stilled. For years, she said, voice wavering just slightly, I thought peace meant quiet, minimal, controlled. But tonight, in this house, I've felt a different kind of peace. She looked around the table, at Kate, at my father, then finally at me. Peace, she continued, is watching a child's eyes light up when they realize they're finally home. Peace is seeing joy that isn't rehearsed, but real. It's the magic you bring into a room, Isabella, even when we didn't understand it. Her voice cracked on the last word. To Isabella, she finished, lifting her glass, who reminded us that peace isn't found in simplicity, but in the joy of creating something beautiful for others. Everyone raised their glasses, but I just looked at her, and in that quiet glance, something heavy finally let go inside me, not because I needed their validation, but because I had stopped waiting for it. What they once called too much had become my gift, my attention to detail, my stubborn love, my big, unapologetic heart. All of it had built a home where even forgotten children felt seen, where even hardened parents found softness again. As the candlelight danced across their faces, I smiled, not because they finally saw me, but because I had never stopped seeing myself. This Christmas wasn't perfect. It was real, and that made it everything. That night, as the candles melted into golden pools and the laughter faded into quiet hums of contentment, I stepped away from the table and stood at the window. Outside, snow blanketed the yard, untouched, undisturbed, and the last of the twinkling lights blinked steadily against the dark sky. Behind me, I could hear Kate helping clear the table, my father telling a group of remaining volunteers one of his old stories, and my mother humming along to a carol she once found too loud. This time last year, I had believed peace meant keeping quiet, shrinking, not making waves, being less. But now, I understood something else entirely. Peace isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of love, of purpose, of being fully, unapologetically yourself, and still being enough. My home didn't need to be simpler. It needed to be filled with the kind of magic that only comes from giving, without expecting anything in return. And the truth is, the greatest gifts rarely come wrapped in ribbons or bows. Sometimes, they come in the form of a child's smile, a sister's apology, a mother's raised glass, or even the quiet knowledge that you finally made peace with your own story. So if you've ever been told you're too much, for caring too deeply, for loving too loudly, or for dreaming too big, let this be your reminder. You were never too much. They were just not ready for your kind of magic. If this story touched you, please leave a comment, hit that like button, and subscribe to the channel. Because somewhere out there, someone else needs to hear this. And together, we can make space for more stories that heal, inspire, and remind us that sometimes being too much is exactly what the world needs. Merry Christmas from my full, messy, magical heart to yours.